Mr. Roy Franklin offers a further amendment in the hands of the clerk. Clerk, read the further.
Mr. Roy Franklin moves that the governor's amendment be amended by striking out the text of the governor's amendment and setting in place of the following. That the bill be amended in Section 8 by striking out subsection B. And
if there be no objection, the clerk will dispense with the reading of the paper. Chair recognizes Mr. Roy Franklin.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in favor of the further amendment to the governor's amendment. Let me begin by thanking the governor and his team for the thoughtful consideration of an act driving clean energy and offshore wind and offering some amendments. We appreciate that he recognized the many commendable ideas in the conference report that would, as he said, be of significant benefit to the Commonwealth. That's attributable in part to the fact that his team was very helpful in the preparation of the many drafts of this bill beginning back in January and leading up to a final product that is before us today. In his amendment letter, the governor recognized that offshore wind is a critical component of a clean, affordable, and resilient energy future for the Commonwealth. And he observed that Massachusetts is positioned to be a national leader in clean energy overall. We indeed share that vision. The governor also offered some improvements to the conference report, several that we adopt in this further amendment. This includes the removal of the price cap and suggestions for changes to the makeup of the Board of Directors of the Mass Clean Energy Center and a host of other items. Removing the price cap has been a top priority for the governor, and we share his view that it will allow our future procurements to give us more value per dollar so that we can build out the necessary supports and attract and retain local offshore wind jobs, thriving supply chains and local businesses, and training and educational opportunities for our constituents. We also adopted some of the changes he urged on green transportation, building decarbonization, and grid readiness. But, as is our duty and obligation, we rejected any amendments that did not further our policy goals. This includes language that suggested language that was weakening our Grid Modernization Planning Council and the Transmission Planning Working Group. We also did not agree to weakening of the biomass language and left intact our pilot program giving authorization for 10 communities to ban fossil fuels in new construction. That's the art of compromise. And in order to get where we are today, we all had to give a little. Now, I read a good description of compromise recently from a book that I'd like to share with you at this time. Compromise comes from an understanding that we all have different life experiences, perspectives, and interests. It acknowledges that there are multiple ways to achieve the same end and multiple steps along the way. Compromise recognizes not only specific interests, but also the interests of the whole community. It can be the forerunner of progress in breaking the rigidity of all or nothing and the gridlock that may ensue. That excerpt is from the book Results, Getting Beyond Politics to Get Important Work Done. And the author is none other than our governor, from his book that was published just a few weeks ago. That line speaks to who he is and what this moment is all about. I can respectfully say that I'm not thrilled with everything that's in this bill, and I know that the Speaker, the Minority Leader, my Senate co-chair, indeed many of you who are in this room have different thoughts about what should be in this legislation. But as the governor said himself, there is no single correct way to get things done, and sometimes we have to compromise for the greater good. We also rejected the amendment calling for opera funding to be included in this bill. Why? Because first of all, our bill is a policy bill, and we did set up 5 funds in the bill to further our policy objectives. They are a clean energy, equity, workforce, and market development program, a clean energy investment fund, a Massachusetts offshore wind industry investment fund, an electric vehicle adoption incentive trust fund, and a charging infrastructure deployment fund. The amount to allocate to those accounts is left to our Committee on Ways and Means. The esteemed gentleman from the North End is well versed in finance, and we have had many conversations about funding these items. And if you look at the economic development bill that's in conference and the transportation bond bill that we just voted on, along with the budget that was passed and which the governor signed just a few weeks ago, you will see that 4 times the amount requested by the governor is under consideration to fund all the activities called for in this legislation. Let me share some of them with you. The Economic Development Bill contains $125 million for clean energy investments, including port development for offshore wind. It contains $50 million for EV infrastructure, $50 million for accelerating adoption of EVs, $150 million for clean energy and sustainability initiatives under mass housing, $10 million in economic development and job stimulation for coastal communities, $200 million for Mass Tech Park Corp. For, among other things, energy storage and batteries, and $27,700,000 for various initiatives for climate resiliency and reducing emissions. The transportation bond bill that we just voted on contains $200 million for EV infrastructure, $1,375 million for sustainable transit modernization, and $145 million for multimodal planning and programming. And the budget that was just signed contains $400 million to decarbonize and minimize the environmental impacts of state-owned facilities, equipment, and related capital assets. And our climate and energy bill before you now contains $350 million in tax incentives over the next 10 years. Combined, that's $3.1 billion for climate and energy matters. Again, 4 times the amount proposed by the governor. Let me also clarify something about what this bill does not do and never did. Contrary to some media reports, this legislation does not end gas-powered auto sales in 2035. In fact, that was done long ago and consistent with the Federal Clean Air Act when we adopted motor vehicle emission standards based on California's emission standards. And the governor himself made the ban on gas-powered autos part of his plan released in December 2020, mandating that all new cars sold in the state be electric by 2035. In this bill, we simply added a provision making it a violation of the Consumer Protection Act if a dealer sells a vehicle that is not zero emissions after 2035. I want to reiterate thanks to you, Mr. Speaker, for your consistent leadership on clean energy going back several years, and for your continued support and commitment to robust climate policy. With this conference report, as you well know, Massachusetts is poised to restore its position as the national leader on offshore wind and clean energy. And thank you again to the gentleman from the North End, our Ways and Means Chair, for his steadfast leadership and guidance as well. And special thanks to our House Counsel, Jim Kennedy, who helped pull this all together with many late nights, weekends, phone calls, and emails, all to make sure it's legally accurate. I want to reiterate that offshore wind and clean energy is a huge opportunity for Massachusetts. Offshore wind is a large and growing source of clean energy around the world and is poised for rapid growth here. Massachusetts is uniquely prepared to capitalize on the nation's emerging offshore wind industry and become the Saudi Arabia of offshore wind. We are home to the nation's first utility-scale offshore wind farm. That Vineyard Wind project, when it's connected to New England's power grid in 2023, will power 400,000 homes, create 3,600 jobs, and save the emissions equivalent of taking 325,000 cars off the road for a year. The bill and the further amendments are carefully calibrated to attract robust clean energy, world-class manufacturing facilities, intensive workforce training initiatives, and the investments, financial and otherwise, necessary to prepare our electric distribution grid for energy needs of the future. And it puts us on the path to achieve the goals the Commonwealth set with the Roadmap Bill, while helping us avoid the worst effects of climate inaction. As I noted several days ago, we have before us an incredibly comprehensive and groundbreaking piece of legislation. Every one of you should be proud and no doubt will look back at this moment as one of strength and resolve. With your vote today, you return the decision back to the governor about whether it becomes law. And of the many people who live in this Commonwealth, he was chosen to determine this most serious and substantial matter. He was selected to determine the fate of this legislation and our climate and energy future. With his action on this bill, he can be the governor that transforms climate and energy policy in Massachusetts. Or he can be the one who pulled the plug on electrification and the one who took the breeze out of offshore wind. He has an incredible choice to make, and we certainly hope that he embraces the compromise like all of us have already done. I urge you all to support the further amendment and send the bill back to the governor. Let's restore Massachusetts as a national leader on climate policy. Thank you very much.
Question comes on adopting the further amendment. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The further amendment is adopted, thus precluding a vote on the governor's amendment.